Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients or income or community in the process. I'm your host, Amelia Fruby, and this month on the show, we've been doing a series all about AI. I have been talking to creative small business owners, artists, and writers who are thinking quite deeply and intentionally about how AI is being integrated into their businesses and the AI tools that they won't use for many reasons that we've gotten into in these conversations. In addition to my chats with Mel Mitchell-Jackson, Casey Zabala, my spouse JJ Lang, and today, Ayana Zaire Cotton, I also shared a few solo episodes. I walked you through my process for writing a thoughtful AI policy and talked a bit about why I think so many of us are so conflicted about AI use in our businesses. Today's episode will be the last in the series for now. I think AI is going to become an ongoing part of our programming, but as I arrive here in this final episode of the series, I have to be honest that I still don't totally know how I feel about the technology of AI, and I'm realizing that I have so much more to learn about how it works. Every time I do a little more research into what a large language model really is and what it really takes to run one, I have more questions than answers. At the same time, I do feel very clearly about the current function of AI in our capitalist world. And I talked to today's guest a lot about racialized capitalism because we do believe that the tools owned by the most popular AI platforms are actively causing so much harm in the world, including to ourselves and people we love. So I don't know if I believe the AI has to be so harmful. I think I've even been convinced that perhaps local AI or ethically oriented tools or tools with very specific scope used for very particular reasons could be helpful and have beautiful benefits for society. However, the way that AI is working right now, the way that the giant companies who own the most popular models are seeking profits, it seems pretty clear to me that these tools are doing more harm than good. And even though I stay open to future possibilities, I'm also not that interested in giving my money, time, and brain power to investigating AI right now. So I will continue to learn and to listen to the AI landscape, but I'm feeling really good about my commitment to not using generative AI or chatbots in 2026. And that honestly allows me the clarity and space to continue learning. I really worry that if I was just going all in on, using chatbots and asking them everything, I would just accept their answers instead of doing my own research and asking my own questions. And that process still feels so important, dare I even say sacred to me. So I hope that throughout this series, you've heard something that maybe made you want to reflect on your relationship with AI, with technology, with business. I hope that if you are not using generative AI tools, you feel like there's a community of creative small business owners that understands and is with you. You can definitely find us on that thread in the Clubhouse. There are lots of us also inside of the interweb. And if you are using generative or agentic AI tools, I hope that this series has helped you think about how to do that in ways that reduce harm. I have heard from listeners who have canceled their paid or premium AI accounts. And honestly, I really cheer that on. As I've said many times, I don't want to shame or judge anyone in this space, but I do really want us to step into our agency and realize that we do not have to accept the advertising that AI is here to stay and that we have to use it just the ways that the marketing campaigns tell us. Therefore, we better get on it before everybody else figured it out and we're left behind, right? I don't think we have to accept that messaging. I think we can refuse that messaging. I think we can reshape these emergent technologies. And I want to encourage all of us to take the space to pause, to learn, to listen, to connect with other people in that process. Whether you're using AI or not, I think that these conversations are so valuable. And I would love to see you join our ongoing chat in the Clubhouse. I've got a post there that has some really thoughtful reflections on ways people are refusing AI or have stopped using AI or are still interested in AI. And I will link that post in the show notes if you want to join us in that conversation whenever you might be hearing this episode. I'm so grateful to everyone who's tuned into the show, and I'm especially grateful to Ayana, who's joining me here today to talk about an amazing essay she wrote called Transmuting AI Shame into Erotic Self-Respect on listening to your body, not the machine. Ayana is a return guest. I will link her first episode all about world building in the show notes, and I hope that you will stay tuned to this one to learn her new methodology for erotic engineering as inspired by Audre Lorde. Thank you again for tuning in to our AI series. Next week, we're going to be talking about money, so we'll move on to some different topics. For now, let's dive into my conversation with Ayana. Hi, Ayana. Welcome back to Off the Grid.
I'm so happy to be back, Amelia. You have no clue how perfectly timed this is for all of us. We're all thinking about this topic so much. So just thank you for creating the space for us to think and dream and world build alongside each other inside of this very timely conversation.
Well, thank you for stepping into this space and world with me. And could we open just a bit with you sharing, when and how did you start using ChatGPT? When did this tool come into your world?
Yeah. So in that essay, I think I mentioned that I started in 2023 and, it was one of those word of mouth things where it's like, okay, let me check this out. But there wasn't as much guidance by osmosis of how to truly leverage it. And so I didn't return back to it. Like I played around with it in 2023, but was kind of like, well, I don't even know how to use this exactly. So it wasn't until 2025 that I picked it back up. And it started with building an itinerary for a family trip. Then it was like, oh, I have this plumbing issue and I don't know what this weird connector piece is. Let me take a picture of it. And then it told me. And then I was able to go to the hardware store and troubleshoot. And it was like, oh, wait a minute. And then it very quickly transitioned into, where can I use this in my work? Where can I use this in my business? And I'm a queen of typos. Anyone work. The writing just floods through me and I don't catch the typos. So I started using it for administrative purposes. And then it quickly went into project management and how to sequence certain things that I knew I wanted to roll out in my business. And that's how it started in the beginning. I mean, honestly, around stuff that I want to hire for, if I'm honest, right? Admin and operations. And then, we started seeing the journalism and the reports and our peers kind of calling us in to accountability. And then that's when I was like, oh, let's press pause. Let's actually see what is actually underneath this relief that I am experiencing through quote unquote collaborating with this tool. And the ways in which it's extending my capacity and how that's almost making me feel safer in my output and what I'm able to accomplish. And that's when I was like, oh, wait a minute, what is actually behind the ways in which this tool is actually extending my capacity to do more when my body deeply wants to do less. My body and my mind and my spirit, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much you've already said that I want to highlight and underscore. I think that impulse to hire AI instead of a human being.
Yeah.
Or as free or super cheap assistant. I'm so glad you named that because that is one of the most common ways I'm hearing from people that they're using AI, right? It's checking the emails, it's making the launch calendar, it's doing all of this sort of operations and behind the scenes work that many of us find challenging or boring or uninteresting when we run our own business and when we're self-employed and we historically have had to do it anyway. And so it's now AI can do this and I can do so much more. And something I've really been trying to interrogate is what is that more that I'm doing? Because there's now early research that's essentially when AI is fully integrated into workplaces, no one's working less. It's not taking work off the plate, right? It's just creating more pressure to do more work. Where you ended, you kind of said, like, my mind, body, and spirit wanted to do less. How did you figure that out? I'm curious where that, like, more versus less really started to come out in your experience.
So, I think we chatted back in 2024, and I had like just launched the retreat inside at Cedar School, and there was like so much, it felt like generativity around and inside of my business, on the other side of like launching something. And since then, I have been stewarding a story, stewarding a novel, and I'm sure you can relate to this. I think as creative folks, as business folks, as intuitive folks, we start projects and it seems like, we're entering into a dark forest of the newness and we don't know what's on the other side, but we know we have to embark on this idea. And I found myself really being initiated by this project and it really requiring like a depth of slowness and stillness that for a long time I struggled with because it didn't feel safe to slow down in some ways. So much of my work and the work that I'm always inviting us to do is like, let's get really curious about this like relationship to external validation and safety and like overworking and safety. What beautiful, beautiful, beautiful practitioner Des Davis calls currency for connection. How and where are we using overworking, overextending, over delivering as a currency for connection? And how does that actually kind of get in the way of the work that is like the most like honest and erotic and pleasurable and kind of like initiatory work that wants to come through us? So it was that tension that clued to me. Like it was like my inability to like slow down in my business, to slow down the marketing, to slow down the free workshops, to slow down all the like list building things, right? To slow down actually all of the places where I was like low-key working for free in the name of marketing and growth.
Mhm.
Right? Like I think there's a fine line between building our list and just like feeding the engine and just going, going, going. So I slowly started kind of reducing my client load. I slowly started reducing my workshops. I slowly started like not writing as many newsletters or as many podcasts. And I remember maybe kind of like tapping on the shoulder of AI that, maybe I can use this tool and continue to write my book and continue to have my business and continue and continue and continue and continue. And I want to kind of touch on that piece that you mentioned earlier around free labor and unpaid labor, because that is actually what the novel that I'm working on kind of is about, is this kind of reflection on almost what I'm seeing is like the mamification of AI, right? Sonia Renee Taylor, she posted this What's Up, Y'all. She does these What's Up, Y'alls where she just offers these like really casually brilliant cultural critiques. And she has one called like, where do I want to slave as it relates to AI? Like that's the question that it seems like these companies are inviting. Where do I want free labor? Where do I feel entitled to free labor? And what is with that entitlement that we feel around grasping and grabbing for tools that extend our capacity without any reciprocity? Olivia Michaela Ross and Jasmine Jones talked about this in an interview they did for Polyester. I believe it was Polyester Zine, around Seeking Mavis Beacon, this beautiful film they created. And, Olivia was like, we should be paying these there needs to be compensation happening somewhere. And then folks will be like, okay, well, they're not sentient. Does that matter? What about the planetary, the planetary extraction? Is there ever right relationship inside unpaid labor or labor without this expectation of reciprocity. I don't know if it's possible, right? So I think that's also a very deep, very serious part of this conversation. And we can, get into care work and, right, all of the ways in which feminized labor is often unpaid and how we have a lot of these AI, they get these like feminized names. Like this is a labor conversation. And I know you've touched on that in this series too. This is fundamentally a conversation about labor and something that emerged inside of the ways in which this novel has initiated me into slowing down and finding true sturdiness and like somatic safety inside of my own stillness is this methodology that you alluded to earlier that I've been building out inside of Cedar School, which is erotic engineering. And that is simply the practice of aligning our desire with our capacity, which I truly is our only job right now. Like, I'm like, okay, this moment feels so complicated. Well, how do we drop into focus, drop into our bodies? And this framework of like, is it aligned with my desire? And is it aligned with my capacity? How can I do this thing in alignment with both? And what if that's the only thing we need to concern ourselves with right now? And if there's misalignment with my capacity, how do I course correct? If this thing is misaligned with my desire, how do I course correct? And how do I drop into the belief that alignment is possible with my body as it is in this world as it is?
Yeah, what's really coming up for me here on that last point is that if erotic engineering is this practice for aligning our desire with our capacity, and AI is an artificial extension of our capacity, then when we use AI, we are disconnecting ourselves from desire. And when we do that, there are so many impacts and effects on our lives and our relationships and our creative efforts and dreams and visions and everything else. So it does really feel like AI is kind of breaks something in that relationality. And that goes back to your emphasis on reciprocity. And where is their compensation for labor? I think the way you wove that together was so helpful for me to see that, like, okay, within this capitalist system we live in, labor needs to be compensated. And right now, that's through money. But if we break free of that system, even then, labor should be reciprocated with care, with other things, right? And so we can operate on both those levels. We can say, like, somebody's got to pay for the chatbots, y'all. Like someone has to do it.
And right now it's the planet. Like it's being exploited, It's not maybe necessarily a person. Well, there are communities being exploited too, let's be clear.
Yes, there are people being exploited and the planet's being exploited. The workers who are talking about horrifying conditions of the factories, essentially, largely in Africa, where they are training and processing data and tagging video and creating the things that train these models. Basically, it's still human labor that's doing that. And there's a really beautiful effort called AI as African Intelligence that's really trying to uplift that, like, there's human labor behind these tools, and as well as all the reporting on the environmental impacts. I'm also thinking here of, as we're recording this, OpenAI has just announced they're shutting down Sora, their video creation app. And what I'm seeing in that reporting is like, there are so many layers of obscuring how money is being spent, who's doing the work. Like, these tools are presented to us like they're just cheap and easy and will give us free stuff for our business. But that's such a lie. That's literally the same myth that social media companies told us. And that was a lie then. And I think it's an even more destructive lie now.
Kate Crawford, who wrote Atlas of AI, talks about this in her book too, kind of like in the chapter about labor. Like there is this kind of like guise of automation. I think the same thing happens with like, Amazon Prime. seems like this thing is like magically appearing on your doorstep within minutes because of robots or because of automation, when really it is human bodies that are feeling the pressure of this like marketing myth that we've all been sold, that this is magic, this is automation, this is the future, when really it's human bodies holding this up. And there's a reframe that Karen M. Rose offers us that I've been obsessed with lately, and she calls it ancestral intelligence. And a lot of the conversations we've been having inside of Cedar School, there's this beautiful book by Ron Eglash called African Fractals, Modern Computing and Indigenous Design. And something I love, something that is actually making me feel so empowered in this moment, is remembering that modern computing, software itself, started on the weaving loom, started with an indigenous technology, started with like a making by hand, like, a slow process. And there's also the ways in which, ones and zeros, binary code, like all of that is kind of like at the heart of African divination and that tradition. And so I think so often, even we can even think about core rope memory, how weaving core rope memory is the craft of that. Literally weaving wire was what sent folks to space. So if these indigenous crafts and technologies and divination practices are actually powerful enough to be at the heart of modern computing and AI and if we can do that with this technology, what is the more erotic move we can make? How do we actually use that same seed of innovation, indigenous innovation, to do something that is more in alignment with our values, with our Black feminist politic, with what our neighbors need, with what our body is calling for, with what our planet is inviting us into, right? And we say people and planet as if they're two different things, but and indigenous folks know this deeply. We think about clay, we think about fiber art. That is nothing but interspecies communication. And AI cannot exist without its water use. And without that, too, is interspecies collaboration. So how do we if the choreography of interspecies collaboration is present, but for the aims of exploitation, how do we just shift our head to the left and point toward something else that actually is about belonging?
I really love how you're always helping us and helping me specifically, like zoom out to the level of world building, zoom out to an interspecies, intergalaxy perspective where we stop thinking of ourselves as separate from the planet or honestly as separate from AI. There's so much conversation. And I think even I have fallen into this myself of being like human or AI, human versus AI. Like these are two totally different things. But this technology is also, by us, for us, about us, right? Like, and I think that so much can happen when we stop seeing it as separation in that way. Not saying we need to like fully meld with AI or just accept the current, colonial imperialist ways that AI is being sold to us. But I also think it's helpful and healing to not think of ourselves as separate from or against it.
Right.
I am loving all of this. And I also want to take a step back a bit because something I really appreciate about your essay was the way that you sort of took us from the place where you were still using AI and feeling misaligned about it to all of these like brilliant ways you've reconceptualized the relationality of it. And you wrote about how you almost recorded this podcast episode called "A Pure Politic on AI Feels Problematic and Boring."
Which I still believe, by the way.
Yeah. Obviously, right? Like this whole conversation already shows that. But I just related so much to the story you told there of just like coming up with this title, trying to write the piece to sort of justify or assuage your shame, and then realizing like, this is out of integrity. Why am I doing this? Like getting to something deeper underneath it. So could you sort of share with us the story of that episode, where it came from, how you worked through not creating it, and what happened next?
Well, I first have to say, I think as business owners and creatives and storytellers, like as folks who may be talented at sales, which is just really talented at storytelling, we can sometimes craft very compelling arguments for our own bullshit.
Yeah, preach that. That's so real.
And that gets me in trouble. Like, there was one time I was having a conversation with my girls. I was like, I feel like y'all don't call me out enough. Like, I feel like y'all don't check me enough. I'm not getting read for filth by my friends enough. And I know I'm not out here being perfect. And they were like, well, girl, you be telling us what you doing and what the next step is. And it just sounds so good. So, so I think we can get into these. If we are compelling storytellers, if we are compelling salespeople, we can kind of convince ourselves in these really like sometimes beautiful ways without checking in on our own values and the ways in which like we want to be accountable. Because at the end of the day, that's our job. That's our job. We can be in community where, the desire, the intention, the agreement is for other folks to hold us accountable. And I know for me, I talk about Black feminism so much because I'm most interested in being accountable to Black feminists. So it's very rare that I'm able to like be out here acting a fool without somebody saying something. We all have to have a practice of kind of checking in with ourselves daily. Mariam Kaba reminds us, if we are closing the gap between our values and our actions every day, like if we're trying to close that gap, we're on the right path if we're closing that gap. And I think about that so often. So inside of my own AI use and inside of talking to other folks, I was hearing Black women talk about using AI, folks who, are tasked with holding way too much grief, way too much labor. Hortense Spillers has this quote it was Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe. In this essay, she said, my country needs me. And if not, I would have to be invented. Like I would have to be invented if I wasn't here. So there is this way in which there are folks, women of color, queer folks who are really kind of like the social and care infrastructure of our communities in this country, the states. And I was like, I don't blame them for wanting to make their load lighter. I don't blame the neurodivergent folks who are like, yo, we got 4 meetings a day and you want me to sit at this computer for what you know what I mean? And college students or the young people who faced COVID and faced isolation are inside of this loneliness epidemic that we're now talking so much about and are using character AI and these chatbots for social companionship, right? I don't think it doesn't feel productive, helpful to shame us as it relates to that. For the folks who are in this labor market, and there's entire families in this country and overseas that depend on their wallets, right? We got workers who entire mutual aid campaigns are built on this one single person. You know what I mean? And that's a problem in itself, right? But I don't blame that person who, maybe taking care of their family here and then taking care of extended family overseas and they find themselves inside of unemployment and now they're taking AI courses to stay competitive in this job market. All of that is happening. And I was just thinking about, okay, how do we hold all that, but then still also hold us accountable to a world where none of that is the case? Like, we can hold the truth that the country that is declaring the loneliness epidemic is a collaborator in the loneliness epidemic, right? We can hold the truth that single families, single individuals are being tasked with holding way too much labor. I heard you say in the most recent podcast episode, where like entire worlds of audio that are now accessible to folks through AI transcription. Like, let's hold all of that and let's not, I almost stopped there. Do you know what I mean? And was like, let's not shame those folks because on the low, I'm using this too, you know? And then I was like, well, wait a minute. Do I even want to be using this? No. So let's talk about the larger choreographies at play that kind of have us in this bind, and how do we break free from it? Which is how I got to erotic engineering. And I just want to say, I have to cite Audre Lorde. You know what I mean? Because that is where this comes from, that language of erotic engineering. And she says, I have to read this quote because this quote has been something that really has been a true part of my like transmuting my AI shame into erotic self-respect. She says, the erotic is a measure between the beginnings of our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings. It is an internal sense of satisfaction to which, once we have experienced it, we know we can aspire. For having experienced the fullness of this depth of feeling and recognizing its power, this is the part. In honor and self-respect, we can require no less of ourselves. And that's from uses of the erotic in 1978. So I said, you know what? I can require no less of myself than self-respect. So no, I'm not going to publish that podcast as it is. What else might we say? What else might we offer this moment? In self-respect. We aspire to? What can we aspire to?
I appreciate how you are weaving together sort of different sites of shame, I think, actually, that come up. Like, there's the act of shaming people who are using AI tools or other tools or, doing all sorts of things we may decide are wrong. And I think that act often people find like a sort of moral superiority in it. They like develop a sort of pleasure out of that, like looking down on others. And that's why they perpetrate that shaming. I'm curious also for you, like about the other side of that. Because what I've heard from a lot of people who've been listening to the series is that they don't necessarily feel shamed by others, but they feel ashamed. It's like coming up within themselves, the sense of guilt or like they're doing something wrong. And I think that's where self-respect and the erotic is an antidote. But maybe this is the moment you could kind of take us through how you charted your transmutation process from that feeling of shame to erotic self-respect. Because it's beautiful to listen to the invocation of our self-respect, but it can be really hard to cultivate and feel that, right? So could you walk us through maybe those stages of education, conversation, action that you used for this transmutation process?
Well, I first want to say, I feel like shame does numbers on social media. We can
Yeah.
let's just go ahead and name that, right? So that kind of like hierarchy that you were talking about, the looking down, like that polarizing impulse does so well on social media. And whereas like the nuance and like the kind of like, let's hold our hands through these things, like that does less well. So, I don't think it's an accident that some of us are feeling shame around this moment. But I think something else that my transmutation process of like, transmuting AI shame to erotic self-respect, it was like 3 phases: education, conversation, and action. And I noticed for me, before I even go into that process, I just first want to also say that like, we don't need anyone's shame. Like, it actually doesn't help. I think that can also be a comfort to me, is like, no one actually needs this from me. You know what I mean? If I'm actually feeling shame around this being misaligned with my values, and my values is communal care and liberation, and what, Tony K. Bombara says, irresistible revolution, there is nothing irresistible about shame. You know what I mean? Like, it's actually one of those things where, like, if I feel ashamed for being misaligned with my values, then shame doesn't actually even get me closer to the thing I feel misaligned. So, inside the essay, I say, shame is flimsy and we don't need it. Now what? Right? And so for me, it was education, conversation, and action, because I notice that maybe shame, and I think more specifically, silence emerges, and isolation emerges for me in moments of like true, where there's like a true political opening or a portal opening, a world building possibility opening, where there's, I think the pandemic was one of those portal openings. I think the multiple genocides in Gaza and Sudan and Congo, like that was also and then I think also this AI moment is one of those. And I think what can happen is, like, we can drop into shame, silence, and isolation really quickly if we actually just don't know what's going on. So I'm always like, let's read a little bit. Like, let's look at the articles, right? Like, because that's what I need to do before I'm ready to like drop into conversation with folks. Like, I just first need to assemble my own worldview around this thing, see how different, thought leaders are talking about certain things, different scholars, different Black feminist practitioners. What is their take? How do I calibrate that with my lived experience? How does it feel in my body? And then that gives me a level of, I don't want to use the word confidence, because it's not that, but like, that allows me to show up in conversation on just ground that I feel more familiar with, because I've taken the time to do a little bit of and then there's a way in which the conversation becomes an extension of that research, right? So there's a list of articles that I kind of like went through inside of the essay, but it was really around the kind of like ecological, planetary, right, impact of AI, but then how there's like specific harm happening to Black communities, whether and how Atlanta, Georgia has like the high, like that's where like a lot of the data centers are going. And there were articles on, Elon Musk's AI center, like causing air pollution and all these electric bills going up, all of these different things. So and I read Atlas of AI, which was so, so helpful, and returned to, Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology, returned to Simone Brown's Dark Matters, returned to Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression, and just kind of like saturated and kind of like bathed myself and like rested and exhaled inside all of the scholarship that has already happened. I don't know if you feel this, but like sometimes I feel like, whew, thank goodness people are doing this work. You know what I mean? Like, thank goodness you wrote that book. It can meet me in this moment. I feel so much gratitude around authors, and I think about what it took to be this early to the conversation, right? And how maybe those same books that were previously published, what their book advance might look like, what their, what I mean, what their tours may have looked like. And so often I feel like Black feminists are so early to the conversations, and it's like a decade later, we're ready. So I first kind of saturated with gratitude and deep reflection for a lot of the scholarship and intellectual labor and critiques around AI that already existed. And then I brought that to conversations with my loved ones. I talked to like neighbors and friends about, and I'm going to be honest, I was using AI and I kind of saw the articles about the ecological harm at the corner of my eye. Like, I heard the buzzing, but it wasn't until they were proposing a AI data center come to my county that I was in. I am not proud of that, but it was definitely a not in my backyard type of thing. And I think that was coming up for a lot of my friends and family. It was like, well, I ain't gonna stop using this, but I don't want this data center here. It's Prince George's County that I'm speaking of. It's the place where the data center is proposed to be built is Landover Mall, which is, if you're from this county, like that was such staple. And this is not a celebration of malls, but like you have so many fond memories around this place in the 90s. I have so many childhood memories from this place. I took a permaculture course. That was a site for us learning about permaculture and how the forest regrows after we abandon asphalt. Like I have so many memories connected to this place. And that is where there's like a $5 billion proposal. There's a lot of town halls, people with chronic illnesses and disabilities showing up being like, I don't want this here. So that's when the conversation started. And that is also when I was able to start to form my opinions alongside others. And that's honestly where the like depth of compassion emerged, because I was also having conversations with elders, that were like, and I've heard you say this in previous podcast episodes around this like fear of getting quote unquote left behind, or folks saying, well, people were afraid of the internet, or people were afraid of cars, like
People were afraid of books, right?
the printing press.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, yes. And at some point, we do maybe want to consider, what are the ways in which it's a mercy to getting left behind and excluded inside of capitalism? And I don't say that lightly, right? I say that as someone who witnesses, has experienced, and understands the violence of like what happens when racial capitalism counts you out and leaves you behind, right? Like all of these different things. But I do wonder, like, do we want to get ahead in capitalism? Like, do we want to win at this game? Some of us do. That's okay. Some of us do. People joke. I feel like people on the left joke, like, I don't want, like, they'll be like, I don't want to dismantle capitalism before I get rich. Let me get rich first. Let me see something first. Let me get a house. Not having to worry about money before we dismantle this thing. And it's like, okay, but what if, like, Fred Moten invites us to refuse that which that has been refused to us, right? And how that might be a practice of liberation and what we might build inside of that refusal. If we're no longer trying to get ahead or win inside of capitalism, how does that free up our capacity to practice different moves, to run different experiments? So those were a lot of the conversations that I was having. And then I think that kind of leads us to the third step, which is action, which is really activating our agency, practicing AI refusal in all the ways that feel possible to us, right? You can't even type in a Google search without getting an AI overview now. So it's like, yes, that's happening. But again, what might it look like to take seriously the work of aligning our desire with our capacity and allowing that to be enough, not demanding any more of ourselves and each other? What might it look like to live there for a bit and get curious about what gets built inside right relationship with each other, the planet, our own bodies, and our desires and our labor? I've been thinking so much about, we have this term human resources, and that was something, as someone who used to work in tech, we had an HR department, and, it was just something I took for that language. I just took it for granted. And now I'm like, nah, let's get curious about that. What are our human resources? Right? how do we reclaim that? And what do we build with it? Right? What do we build with our human resources? So those were that kind of 3-step process of education, conversation, and action, I think was core to my transmutation process.
I spent 2025 just sort of listening, learning. I was experimenting with the tools. I was trying to understand, how does this work and what is at stake here? And the more I learned, I started to realize that my ignorance, like not knowing, what is AI? What does it even do? Not reading the articles, not actually looking into it. Like that was actually just this sort of shield I was constructing, or like armor I was putting on. Because if I didn't know, it couldn't be that bad, which is so untrue, right? If we're looking away, if you don't see it happening, it's not happening, right? And that's just not the case. But I think it's a common instinct, I would say, especially for white folks living under white supremacy or benefiting from white supremacy, to just like not look at it. And so, yeah, I spent that year learning and then having conversations with people I know in my personal life, with elders, with folks in the interweb, like really getting a sense of how we're all grappling with this. And people across the spectrum, right? Like I have close friends who are building apps with AI and building whole businesses around that. And that's the choice that they're making. And I was listening to them and understanding how they're relating to it. I also have friends who have never once touched a chatbot and never will in their life. Like that is a strong commitment and conviction that they have. So I was listening, I was learning, and then through that education, through those conversations, like that's where this series came from. And as people have heard from all of that, I decided to stop. I couldn't find alignment or integrity in the place of casual generative AI use anymore, nor going all in on it either. And I think a lot still about those two questions I started with, those like what's happening here and what is at stake. And that takes me back to like, I still do the AI transcripts because I feel like now I understand there is a cost and it's worth it to me in this instance. Like it is worth it to me to have the transcripts, to make things more accessible, to invite more people into conversation. That is worth the cost of the technology. I don't actually think it's that helpful to like evaluate on a like instance by instance basis. Is this worth it? Like that's exhausting. I would rather like come up with a set of values and principles and policies that I can just sort of rest in, as you've so nicely said. Hello, my lovely listener. Amelia here, interrupting this amazing conversation because if you're enjoying this episode, the one you're listening to right now, I think you would really love the Off the Grid Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a paid podcast, newsletter, and asynchronous community space for friends and fans of Off the Grid, hosted on Substack. It's where I share bonus episodes about my hot takes, personal feelings, deepest, darkest, brightest, lightest ideas about online business, and more. I also send out a monthly link roundup called The Click Through, where I gather everything that I have been reading, watching, and intrigued by with regards to internet culture, social media happenings, and online business at large. That's also where I have been chronicling the many, many, many announcements I see lately of people taking breaks from social media or exiting platforms entirely. And all of the posts in the Clubhouse have community comment threads where you can ask me questions, share your experiences, and chat with other Off the Grid listeners. It only costs $5 per month or $50 per year to join the fun, and I truly hope that you will head to the show notes and check it out. I look forward to seeing you on Substack, but for now, let's dive back into this conversation. I want to talk more about erotic engineering. You've already defined it for us, this practice of aligning desire with capacity. Could you talk a little bit more about how that happens and why do you believe that's our only job right now? You said that too, and I wanted to hear more about it.
You know, we talk about racial capitalism and we talk about building anti-capitalist businesses and practices and worlds. And I want to be very clear that worlds do not happen without, like, worlds need resources. And in this context, the worlds that we are building require investment. And something that I think about a lot inside of erotic engineering and aligning our desire with our capacity is, yeah, we may, and many of us do, desire more money for very, 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 very valid reasons. And I'm always going to support. I started Cedar School because I was seeing some of the most brilliant creative minds. I was seeing like beautiful ideas emerge out of art practices, out of world building practices, and not seeing the same level of compensation, right? Not it just there being kind of discrepancy there and being like, wait a minute, the depth of ideas that I'm seeing, the depth of passion, work, and labor that I'm seeing has the capacity to actually build new worlds, right? I am seeing folks who are, thinking at the scale of, what do the next universities look like? What do the next hospitals look like, right? What do the next libraries look like? What do the next healing centers and housing cooperative, like, people are thinking at the level of world building, but not getting compensated in a way that, like, allows them to actualize those worlds, right? And so I got really, really curious about, okay, how do we drop into this belief that it is possible to build these new worlds, to actualize these creative ideas, and to actually rest and return to the abundance, financial, relational, right, that is already always here. And something that I see a lot is this idea that it has to be hard. I want to see Black feminists. I want to see queer world builders. I want to see erotic engineers casually stewarding 7 figures, casually stewarding 8, right? Like, casually us building cooperatives that are stewarding and redistributing 9 figures. Like, I want to see that level of income redistribution and income generation. And what does it mean to shift our body, mind, heart to believe that that does not have to be hard or exhausting or require us to compromise our values or our capacity, right? So, like, that too is also at the heart of erotic engineering, right? That the invitation that Audre Lorde, what do we aspire to? How do we expect no less? And how do we believe we can engineer these worlds in alignment with our capacity? Whether that is our capacity, we're a parent, we have limited internet access, we are living in a disabled body, like, whatever that capacity is, how do we shift to the belief that the worlds we are building and the money that we're calling in to build those worlds, that is, because here's the thing. I don't know about you. I actually don't want to build a world that is not in alignment with my desire and capacity. Like, I don't want to succeed at that. Right? I don't want to win at working hard and getting to the finish line.
I mean, as a person with a PhD, I have deep experience in how bad that feels and why it's not satisfying. So
Yes. So it's like, okay, how do we assume the posture we actually want to live it? Like, how do we assume the world we're trying to build now? And so much of that, to me, is what erotic engineering is. And, I looked at the history of engineering. We have symbol engineering. We have electrical engineering. We have aerospace engineering. We have, right, all of these ways in which engineering has shaped our world. And now with AI, there's software engineering, there's prompt engineering, And we didn't even get into AI agents. There's, context engineering, right? So there's all these ways in which we are using our human resources to engineer worlds, technologies, roadways, bridges. Like we're engineering the world, but what does it look like to engineer it in alignment with our desire and capacity? The worlds that we desire and the pace at which our bodies can hold and steward and maintain that desire. I think so much about, Mark Zuckerberg's mandate inside of Facebook, like move fast and break things. Like, what if we repositioned and kind of like was like, okay, what if the invitation right now is to slow down and steward, and not kind of like live in this anxiety or this belief that through slowing down or through calibrating our work with our capacity, that means earning less or generating less. I don't even like the word earn, but like generating less income and experiencing scarcity. I think so many of us have anxiety around being left out of this AI conversation for reasons that kind of are sometimes rooted in scarcity. So what does it look like? What does it look like for abundance to be true and rigorous ease to be true and a desire to be true and financial abundance to be for all of it to be possible? Because if we're being honest with ourselves, that's actually the world we're building. What resources do we need to cultivate in order to live inside that truth?
I also think all the time about how, as you know, I work with creatives and small business owners. And when I really start to dig in with people on what do you want to create, what can this be, like so often when we get in there, there's nothing underneath the like smart idea. There's nothing underneath the clever strategy. And I think to build a creative business, to build resilient businesses, to make our art our living, we have to get all the way to the level of desire. I have not seen a creative business work that didn't have that deep connection to like the gut level, root level. You really want this. Not simply because it's smart, not simply because it solves a problem. Like you can force your way through that for a few years, maybe. Like you can make it work, but you'll just end up back in that place of dissatisfaction and isolation and alienation yet again. So I love everything that you're speaking to and building. How can folks learn erotic engineering with and from you? Do you have an offering for this? Like, who is this for? Who do you want to invite in? I would just love to hear a little bit about where it lives in your business.
Thank you for this invitation. So currently, I am offering one-on-one erotic engineering support through the Powerhouse portal. It's a 90-day container where we work on erotically engineering some project that you want to seed. We work together on finding the most erotic action you can take. Really work on that and seeding a practice around that across 90 days. So whether that's building an offer, whether that's seeding a book proposal or writing the first 3 chapters on this book you've been dreaming about writing, whether it's about seeding a newsletter practice or some sort of creative homecoming, what's the desire? What's your capacity? Let's align them both across the next 90 days and let's see what happens, right? And who this work is for, I mean, what I'm intuiting is that like so many of us, I know myself included, there are ways in which we put our faith and trust in the legibility of these older systems. There were things I wanted back in the day. The cover of Fast Company and Wired magazine and the 430 under 30 and the promotions and the degrees and the certificates and all of the paperwork of legibility and all of the ways in which racial capitalism, colonization, patriarchy, white supremacy, all of these things work because they promise us here is a path of certainty, right? And this path is certain because of control and domination, all of these. And I think so many of us fear our desire or don't drop into, right, the unknown of the erotic because it's so uncertain, because it's so wild, because it's so illegible, right? Too illegible to be safe, too erotic to be safe, too dark to be a place that we can build a business from, a marketing strategy from, a book from, a thing that we are kind of pinning our survival on, right? But what I am seeing shift is that it is actually starting to feel less and less safe to place our trust, faith, and belief on these systems that are crumbling.
Mm-hmm.
And we're starting to feel on an embodied level that the safest bet right now is ourselves.
Mm.
The safest bet right now is actually our desire, is actually that unknown space, is actually that ungovernable space, that wild space, because it hasn't been co-opted, owned yet. It hasn't been foreclosed yet. So it's full of possibility. And I think what we're craving right now is possibility. So I am really interested in working with folks who are curious about that sense of possibility emerging within themselves and their practice. And there's maybe some too erotic to feel safe, but too delicious not to do project knocking on their door. The idea won't let them rest. Ancestors won't let them go. Like we know we got to do it. So how do we not let it overwhelm us? And how do we take the first step, the most erotic action, and how do we kind of tend to that seed across 90 days? That's the offer that I am inviting folks into right now. It consists of 4 biweekly sessions over 8 weeks. You get your own powerhouse plan, and then you kind of work that plan. We work together on that plan, and you work that plan across 90 days. And then there's a check-in at the end of the 90 days where we reflect on how you erotically engineered this project and maybe what you want to do more of and what you want to do less of and what you want to rest in. That's something I'm really interested in inviting folks into. How do we release any idea that any of it has to be hard? Any of our desire has to be hard? It will be rigorous. It will be rigorous, but none of it has to be hard.
Beautiful. I love that it's called the Powerhouse Portal.
Yeah, because I'm like, let's call it what it is. We powerhouses out here. Like, let's just stop being shy.
Yeah. And I'm really taking this invitation from you, or a little bit, I think, of like a useful confrontation almost of like many of us, perhaps most of us, don't believe that we could build a business from the seat of our desire. That feels unsafe or impractical or unwise based on what we're told. But what if that is the only place you can actually build a business from? And stepping into that space that Audre Lorde reminds us of between our sense of self and our chaos of our strongest feelings. Like that is actually where the spark and the magic that animates a whole business comes from. And I know the people who get to work with you through that process are very shepherded, held, and inspired beautifully, I'm sure. So thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you. I love that word impractical. And I also love the word logical. I really do feel like our desire is our most logical and practical compass in this moment. But I am also someone who's like, we need the eroticism and the engineering. We need the poetry and the plumbing. We need the spell and the strategy, the income and the intuition. We need both, right? So we need the practical and the quote unquote impractical. What happens at that intersection? I want to see. And I want to find out together.
Before we go, could you read a bit of your essay to us? Because I would love to leave folks with some of your words that you wrote. You're welcome to read any section you like, but I had pulled out a section on these like central questions that AI is asking for us. And I'm wondering if you could read that to us and then offer any final thoughts you'd like to share as we finish today.
The central questions AI is presenting us with are: do we care more about productivity than we care about water? Do we care more about productivity than we care about Black folks? Do we care more about productivity than we care about our own breath and clean air? Too simplistic. Maybe. Maybe not. What I know for a fact about all matters of racial capitalism is this. Demanding nuance at every turn simply kicks the can down a road with the same destination. Black death becomes an acceptable trade-off in the name of quote unquote progress. Two things can be true. We're all tired with too little time to grieve and care for our communities, and AI is being presented as relief while the entire infrastructure of ecocide and necropolitics is hidden in plain sight. That's the crisis for workers. What about the possibilities? And I'm still holding that question. What about the possibilities? What about the possibilities when Black death is no longer an acceptable trade-off, when women's labor is no longer devalued, and that's like, it's no longer up, that value is no longer up for debate, right? What happens when our worthiness is no longer up for debate? Our desire is non-negotiable. What are the possibilities when it becomes no longer acceptable to trade rivers, communities, breath for the promise of productivity? What becomes possible? And I think that's a question that I'm probably going to be world building in alongside others for a lifetime.
Thank you so much for these beautiful invitations, invocations, questions. I'm really going to hold true to that two things can be true sentence in your piece. That to me feels like what you were just saying about erotic engineering, the practical and the impractical, it all comes together. That's true about AI. It's true about business. It's true about...
What about love?
I love this. I'm like, AI, business, hard things. And you're like, love, relationships, care. Yes, thanks for bringing us to the reasons why, right? Like the pleasures and the joys of life. I can definitely lean into the engineering side and be pulled back to the eros and the erotics of it all. So thank you so much, Ayana, for this entire conversation. Thank you for your writing and your work and for joining me again here. I truly hope that you'll be back on Off the Grid many more times and that we can continue to hear about the evolution of everything you do on the show and elsewhere. So I'll link to everything you mentioned in the show notes. I will also link your essay, which has a whole section of citations of its own. So listeners, all of that will be in the show notes. But for now, we thank you for spending this time with us, and we send you back into your communities, back into your desire, back into your capacity. And until next time, we will see you off the grid.
I kinda hate social media, feeds on my brain like a bacteria. If you read my Wikipedia, it'll say I kinda hate social media. Post a picture of myself, sacrifice my mental health, use your product, time to sell. I would rather go to hell. Do you like this? Leave a comment. Can you share this? Will you wear this? Do you like this? Leave a comment. Can you share this? Will you wear this? Okay.
That was an abridged version of Social Media by Surfer Boy and Rectangle. To hear the entire song, find Surfer Boy on Spotify or head to the link in the show notes. Thanks so much to them for sharing the song with us, as well as to Melissa Caitlin Carter, who sings our theme song that you hear at the start of every show. I'm your host, Amelia Fruby, and if you enjoyed this episode, I hope you will download the free Leaving Social Media Toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. Until next time, I will see you off the grid.